Hi there people, welcome to my channel. My name is Tina and I live in Scandinavia and winter season is in full swing here and everyone feels the need for a really warm winter jacket. Now of course I have several, but I was looking around, I was feeling inspired. I looked at Pinterest of course and I found these puffer jackets. I must say I really love the expression puffer jacket. It sounds so cute. But I wasn't interested in this very puffy, the sort of traditional or not so traditional puffy style, but I found this one from Prada. And it is not recent, it is from autumn winter 20 to 21, so it's definitely out of style by now, but I like it. And I want to make a jacket with a proper collar and a lapel, but in the puffer jacket style, lined with this sort of puffy polyester filling. And I'm going to use this fabric. This is something I have been hoarding for maybe 15 years. I bought it from a shop selling deadstock fabric, so I have no idea where it is from originally. But it is printed in this small scale pattern and it is very, very Japanese looking to me. There is also this fact that it is printed in long stripes, long panels of print divided with these brown plain stripes in between. And the fact that it is a sort of Japanese style print and long narrow panels tells me that this could have been intended for a kimono from the beginning, because you make kimonos out of very narrow fabric. And I have a book called Designer's Guide to Samurai Patterns. And I do think that absolutely every print on this fabric could be taken directly from this book. And probably intended for a kimono from the beginning. But this material is 100% polyester and it's terrible to feel against your skin. So making a jacket out of it with another fabric for lining is a really good solution. So I'm starting to cut it out. And it was of course tricky. As usual, I didn't really have enough fabric, but that is normal for me and my sewing, so with a few tricks we will make this work. Here I am cutting out the undercollar from another fabric, a dark green felt, and I had to piece the upper collar with a seam at center back, but the undercollar in the dark green felt didn't need that seam. I'm also adding details from another fabric. This is leftovers from a dress I made many years ago. And here I am using that for the underside of the pocket flaps. And for the collar, I cut out fusible interfacing. I never cut the interfacing with seam allowance. As you can see, I've ironed it on here and I am sewing it together at center back. Then we have the collar stand. This one here is cut on the diagonal because it needs to be stretchy. You can also see here, there's a small piece of seam allowance missing, but it won't affect the seam, so it's okay. You can also see here, I'm showing you that it is in fact quite stretchy. Cut on the bias, of course. And here it is, sewn together. And I'm moving on to the underside of the collar, the green felt. Doing the same thing, except this fabric is a little bit stretchy in itself, so I didn't need to cut the collar stand on the diagonal or the bias. I have sewn down the seam allowance to make it as flat as possible. And by now I realize I should have added fusible interfacing to the collar stand too, so I'm trying to add it after it's sewn together. In all honesty, it would have been easier to rip that seam open, but I did my best. I tried really hard and it did actually work in the end. And I'm going to show you here in some detail how I sew this collar. There are many different ways to sew a collar to a jacket, but what I'm doing here is that I'm sewing the upper and the under collar together, right side to right side, along the outer edge. After I have sewn them together, I'm also trimming down the seam allowance pretty carefully and also cutting off the corners. And I turn the collar and top stitch along the outer edge. And what I've been doing next here is that I'm folding over the outer edge of the collar towards the underside. This is the edge that I just top stitched. And I'm temporarily pinning it in place, folded over to the backside. And you can see that I'm using my fingers to sort of push on the green fabric to push it away from the edge. Now, if you have a pattern for a jacket with a collar, usually it comes with two pattern pieces for the collar, one upper collar and one under collar, and they are of different size. The under collar needs to be a bit smaller. But here I did cut them both from the same pattern piece, and that means I have to sort of manually fix this afterwards. And I am pinning this in place with the upper collar being bigger, going over the fold I just pinned, and the under collar sticks out along the other edge. And I'm just cutting off what's sticking out. After I've cut that off, I also sew these two sides together in the seam allowance with a very narrow seam allowance here. And after that, I remove all the pins, and now I have a collar that automatically wants to roll, both roll around the neck. The outer fabric needs to be a bit bigger when it goes around the neck, but it also wants to roll over the fold of the collar. The outer collar needs to be a bit bigger there too. And by doing this, I have now fixed it permanently in this position. You can do this by ironing, steaming your collar, but this is all polyester. There is absolutely no way to iron this into any kind of shape. I have to sew it into the fabric from the beginning. Now this is called turn of cloth, and it is a very important thing to use when you are trying to use proper tailoring methods in sewing, and I'm definitely planning to make a special video about this in the future, but here I did go into a little bit of detail. But now let's move on to the next step of this jacket, and the next step it is to finish up the front pieces. This model has a front dart that goes from the bottom up to the bust, from the side seam, the front side seam I should say, to the bust, and then there's also quite a narrow side panel, and I'm all putting it together here. After that is done, I start the pockets. And first step is to put fusible interfacing all along the pocket opening on the inside of the fabric, and I of course iron it on across the seams. And now the thing here with welt pockets is that it's always quite annoying, all the marking you need to do. There is really no way around it. You have to transfer the markings over and over again to the same place, it feels like. And the one advantage you can get from black fusible interfacing is that chalk shows up really well. So here I've marked where I'm going to sew. Now the welts for this one, I'm going to cut out of this dress fabric that I showed you earlier. This is just for fun, just to add some sort of contrast. I'm also trying to mimic a little bit the more traditional Japanese way of dressing where you mix patterns. And here's a very interesting view of my hair. And when I have sewn these welts in place, I of course cut the middle open. I cut up to the little corners very carefully. So you get these tiny little seam allowances, one on each side. And after that, I am just flipping the fabric through to the back side of the whole front piece. And then it's time to pin these welts in place, long, nice, even welts. And I've moved on to the pocket bag here. I am placing a piece of this pretty floral fabric on the inside of the pocket because this will be visible through to the outside. I don't want white fabric there. I am then pinning the pocket bag together along the sides, not going through the outer fabric, just the pocket bag. And I'm going to sew all around that. But first I would like to include the pocket flaps. So let's make them. And here they are. Of course, I pin them together outside and inside, right sides together. I am once again making sure that the outside of the pocket flaps is bigger than the inside. You can see here more fabric, and then I trim around them, turn, press and top stitch, and here they are. And now you just insert them into the pocket. And I have marked on the pocket flaps how far in they're supposed to go. Made it with chalk so you can barely see it, but it helps me get them at the right height. And after that I'm folding away the upper fabric and just simply pin it so it's out of the way and sew around the pocket bag. Both, all the way around 360 degrees, and that includes the pocket flap, and here they are, finished. And now it's already time to do the back piece. First of all, this brown printed line is of course not supposed to be visible. I'm sewing a seam that hides this in the seam allowance, so it won't be visible. I've also completed the darts of the backside that is giving shape to the shoulders. At the same time, I'm working on the lining. I have sewn the darts into the shoulders of the lining, and now I'm creating the center back fold. All lining always needs lots of extra fabric for ease of movement. So I'm sewing the top and the bottom of the back piece to be the same size as the outer piece, but in the middle, in between that, there's an open fold that can expand if needed. And you can see here when it's finished, lots of extra fabric. And here we have some extra too. It's the sleeves, and wow, these are confusing shapes. Here are the darts, and I am clearing up my own markings here, trying to make it clear to myself because I am already confused. And I think you can see also that I have cut out both the fabric and the lining on top of each other. So I am doing the markings, cutting the notches in the side seam through all the layers at the same time. And there was a lot to mark on these sleeves. I can say now that I did go a little bit overboard with all these darts and folds. They are fun, really fun sleeves. Not so much fun making them and making sure that I got everything in the right place. I struggled with matching up all the markings, and then when I had done the outer sleeves, of course, I had to do the lining sleeves in the same way. So this did take some time, but in the end, I ended up with 2 outer sleeves and 2 lining sleeves that all go together. Wow. And the next step here is to sew the lining to the inside of the lapels. And this is how the inside of the front pieces looks like. And now over to the polyester wadding. It's a terrible material to use. It is really bad for your scissors. It's a nightmare to cut. It's a nightmare to sew, but it is lightweight. It makes the jacket very fluffy, and that's what I'm going for here, so there's no other option. And one of the things that's really difficult with this material is making darts, and there are quite a few of them in the sleeves. So this is how I do it. I simply cut out the triangle of the dart and pin it together along the seam at the end of the dart and just leave this area open. I don't sew the darts closed in any way. This means, of course, that the wind can blow right through, but this material isn't stopping wind anyway, and it won't be visible on the outside, and it will reduce the bulk of the seam quite a lot. And one other annoying thing with this material is that it's impossible to sew it, however you try to do it. I'm experimenting a little here, and I am including a strip of ordinary cotton fabric on top of these 2 layers of wadding. That worked okay. Way better than trying to sew directly into the material, because the presser foot will absolutely eat this material and you don't get anywhere basically. And this worked okay. And here I have the sleeves complete, and I'm sewing them into tubes with the lining on the inside, and on the outside is this polyester layer, and I'm including my strip of fabric, and this worked, as I said, pretty okay. And I am jumping back and forth in the process here because this is sort of experimental. So now I am sewing the front edge together, front outside to the lapel or the inside. And of course I am once again making sure that the lapel is a bit bigger than the outside, because when it's supposed to turn out, it needs a little bit more fabric. Since this wadding in between is quite thick, this is pretty important. After sewing the seam, I am of course trimming down the seam allowance, and here I have the interlining. And I didn't include this one in the seam, therefore I need to remove all the seam allowance all the way around it. So I'm cutting it down, trimming it to make it just a tiny bit smaller than the space it's going to occupy inside of the jacket. Another thing that I do when I use this thick lining is that I cut away a piece in the armpit. And I do that because it gets way too bulky and way too warm under your arms if you don't do it. And this works really well. I've been doing this for years and it works really well. But now back to the outside, the shell of this jacket. I'm sewing both of the shoulder seams, and after that it's time to install the collar. As you remember, the collar is all prepared. No need to fiddle with the layers or the shape anymore. And I'm just pinning it to the neck opening. And I'm pinning it all the way to where I started sewing for the lapel. There was a point marked there for end of collar, start of lapel. And I'm pinning pretty carefully. I'm also measuring the collar very carefully. I want the both sides of the collar to be very identical. This is a thing you spend a lot of time on when you do tailoring for a jacket, making sure that the collars and the lapel are absolutely identical on both sides of the body. And after all that pinning, of course, it's time to sew the collar in place, which I do from this end point to end point. And after sewing, I am, of course, double checking that it actually ended up being symmetrical. And I'm quite happy with how these lapels and collar turned out. So yeah, let's move on. I'm now fitting this interlining inside the front piece, and this was quite tricky. This, as I said, it is a bit experimental how I do this, and I had to work really hard to get it to sit right along the outer edge all the way around. It worked in the end, but it took some time and fiddling. And after all that fiddling, I am now pinning it quite carefully in place because I really want it to stay there now. And after pinning, I am actually gonna baste this also, but in the end there will be top stitching all around the edges of the jacket to keep it in place, but we're not there yet. So first basting, and I do this from the back side along the edge of the facing on the inside, and this is going to keep it properly in place. I am sewing all through all the layers here. And after that it is time to complete the lining, the inside of the jacket. I'm sewing the shoulder seams together with first the lining and then the polyester wadding all included. And now I have complete shoulders on the inside. And with that, I can sew the inside of the collar. And of course, I'm turning it right side to right side here. And I am pinning it and sewing it along the seam I've already made to put the collar in place. And since this is a very curved seam and also complicated with so many layers, I am double checking that I don't have any little pleats or folds. And of course I did have a few, but it's quite easy to unpick the seam for just a shorter distance and get these folds out. When that is done, I am adding a little hanger to the inside of the collar in the neck. And after that, I am preparing these extra pockets for the sleeves. Well, actually just one pocket for one sleeve. And I made a little band that's supposed to hang down from the pull of the zipper, trying to insert it in the little hole in the pull, but that didn't work. I think I need a jump ring of some kind, but I used a safety pin temporarily, but honestly, it's still there. But yeah, now I'm attaching the pocket to the sleeve. I should have attached it way higher, but it's experimental. After that, I am attaching the sleeves. First, the outer layer of the fashion fabric. On the inside, I was cutting away from this thick polyester wadding in the armpit, just as I did on the front and back side. I am here sewing all the layers together. The lining layer and the wadding layer all in one go, all together. Of course, when there's no wadding anymore, I just keep on sewing just the two layers of lining instead. And to manage this, I am including this strip of fabric. Now, with these many layers, you have to double check that you didn't miss any part of the fabric in the seam. I had to redo a little piece here because it's really easy, it's really slippery. But in the end, we have sleeves both in the outer fabric and in the lining. Woohoo! And now we are sewing the side seams together, all in one go, side and sleeves. And as you can see clearly, there's a piece of wadding missing in the armpit, as it should. I'm just sewing this seam, ignoring that hole. But at the bottom of the jacket where I'm going to put the hem in, I'm also cutting away quite a long piece of the lining along the seam, because the seam, if it includes this wadding, makes it really hard to manage. Here you can see there's a piece of wadding missing. But apart from that, this is just an ordinary side seam that I make 4 of. 2 in the outer fabric, the shell fabric, and 2 in the lining fabric. And then I can put the sleeves inside themselves, and you have a jacket. And you can see that it's very sort of thin just in the armpit because I cut away so much wadding. And I'm going to thank myself later for that. The next thing I'm doing is hemming the sleeves. I am just folding the fabric of the shell fabric, the outer fabric, in. And I'm doing the same thing with the lining, so folding them towards each other, pinning them with the edge parallel, and top stitching all around. This is a very simple, basic way of hemming. Not very elegant, but it suits the style of the jacket. And the second step is that I'm top stitching around 2 centimeters from the edge, and hemming the whole jacket. I'm doing more or less the same thing, just folding the fabric under and pinning it. Here you can see I'm very happy that I cut away a bit of the wadding, makes it way easier. I decided to decorate the back side with a piece of this other fabric. I'm just, attaching it on top and sewing it in place along the bottom edge. And after that, I am top stitching all around the edge of the jacket, 2 centimeters from the edge, to finish it. And after that, we're already at choosing buttons. I need 1 button, and I have so many to choose from. I decided also to decorate the buttonhole, or actually reinforce it with once again a patch sewn on from this other fabric. I decided on this green leather button, and we're done. Now let's have a look at the reveal.